Honestly, right now, your garden is probably wasting more than you realize. Every one of those faded blooms you're leaving on your salvia, your coneflowers, your daylilies, it's still pulling energy from the plant. Instead of that energy going toward roots or new buds, it's going toward making seeds nobody asked for. So you keep watering, you keep feeding it, and you're sitting there wondering why everything slows down right around late July. Here's the thing though, your plants aren't tired. They're just putting their energy in the wrong place, and honestly, that's not really your fault. Nobody ever sat you down and showed you the exact spot to cut, or the exact moment to do it, that actually flips the switch and gets a plant blooming again. There are 9 flowers sitting in your yard right now that are holding on to this exact potential. And I'll tell you now, flower number 6 on this list, people get it wrong so often that fixing just that one mistake alone can basically double how much it blooms before fall shows up. So here's what we're covering. 9 flowers that a lot of us have growing in our yards already, and every single one of them is holding back a second round of blooms for one simple reason. July is the month most of us get deadheading wrong without even knowing it. By the time this video's over, that won't be you anymore. Flower number 1 is bee balm, and if you've ever grown it, you know exactly what I mean when I say it stops people in their tracks. Picture these shaggy, almost firework-shaped blooms in scarlet, magenta, deep purple, just exploding out from the center of the plant. Honestly, once you've grown bee balm, a plain round flower next to it looks kind of boring in comparison. It grows about 2 to 4 feet tall on sturdy little square stems, and each bloom shoots out these thin tubular petals from one dense head. The colors run anywhere from a soft lavender pink all the way to a fire engine red, and the foliage has this minty, citrusy smell that hits you the second you brush past it. My grandmother used to grow this along her back fence, and I still remember that smell every summer. Now, it blooms from June through August, but here's what most people miss. By early to mid-July, that first round of flowers starts browning pretty fast in the heat, and that's actually your cue. That's the plant telling you it's ready for a trim. Deadhead it right then, and you'll usually get a second flush, often fuller than the first, by late August. Skip it, and the plant basically calls it quits 2 months earlier than it needs to. Bee balm likes full sun, rich soil that stays evenly moist, and decent airflow around it. It does well in zones 4 through 9, and you'll want to water it deeply about once a week if it's not raining. Here's something that surprised me when I first learned it. Bee balm is one of the only plants in the mint family that hummingbirds actually seek out mid-flight, because the shape of that tubular flower is basically built for their exact beak length. It's like the plant and the bird were made for each other. Now, the mistake almost everyone makes here is only snipping off the top bloom and leaving all the side buds alone. That doesn't really do much because the plant's energy doesn't redirect the way it should. What you actually want to do is cut the entire flower head down to just above the first healthy set of leaves underneath it, not just pinch the petals off. Get this wrong, and it's not just this year's blooms you're losing. You're setting the plant up for something you won't even notice until next spring, when it just doesn't come back the way it should. Flower number 2 is the Shasta daisy, and honestly, this is probably what pops into your head the second somebody says the word daisy. Crisp white petals, that flat golden center, clean and classic against any green backdrop. There's a reason this flower shows up in just about every cottage garden photo you've ever stopped to admire. They grow about 1 to 3 feet tall, forming these tidy little mounded clumps of dark, slightly glossy foliage, with each flower sitting up on its own stem. The bloom itself pretty much always stays that same bright white and gold combination, and that's actually why it looks so clean and put together in a border. It doesn't get messy or unpredictable the way some flowers do. Now, Shastas bloom heaviest from June into July, and by mid-July, those spent blooms turn brown and papery fast in the heat. It drags the whole plant down visually. Honestly, makes it look tired. But if you deadhead consistently through July, you'll pull a second flush clear into September. Leave those spent heads sitting there, though, and the plant just redirects everything into making seeds instead of new buds. They like full sun, average soil that drains well, and moderate water. They'll handle zones 4 through 9 without much fuss. And here's something worth remembering. Overwatering is actually more dangerous for this plant than underwatering it. Here's a fact that surprised me. Shasta daisies aren't even a wild species. Luther Burbank actually bred them deliberately, over 17 years, crossing 4 different daisy species just to land on that pure white color. 17 years, just for a flower. That's dedication most of us don't have the patience for. The mistake most people make is grabbing the hedge trimmers and shearing the whole plant flat, which takes out healthy buds right along with the spent blooms. What you actually want to do is deadhead each stem by hand, cutting it back to the nearest leaf junction. Takes a little longer, but it's worth it. But here's the thing, even if you do everything right with your daisies, it won't matter much if you skip the next flower on this list. This is the one most gardeners quietly give up on by July, and honestly, that's a mistake. Quick question before we keep going. Are you actually going to use what I'm telling you, or are you just going to nod along and let your garden keep wasting energy the way it has every July up until now? If you're serious about turning that around, go ahead and hit subscribe, because the next 7 flowers get even more specific and honestly, more useful than what we just covered. Stick around for this one. Flower number 3 is the coneflower, or echinacea if you want to get technical about it. And honestly, what makes this one stand out is that raised, spiky center, almost bronze in color, kind of architectural looking, with the petals sweeping back like they're bracing against the wind. Even from clear across the yard, that shape just reads as bold. They grow anywhere from 2 to 4 feet tall on sturdy stems, and depending on the variety, you'll see petals in classic purple, pink, orange, red, even pure white. The funny part is, that center cone actually gets darker as the season goes on, so even when the petals start fading, there's still something interesting to look at. Coneflowers bloom from July right through September, and here's what makes them different from the other flowers we've talked about so far. Deadheading in July isn't just about getting a second round of blooms, it's really about pacing out the whole rest of the season. If you get the earliest spent blooms off now, you can stretch that heavy flowering 3 extra weeks into fall. That's not nothing. They like full sun, and honestly, they handle poor or clay soil better than almost anything else on this list, which if you've ever fought with rocky or heavy soil, you know how big a deal that is. They do fine in zones 3 through 9, and once they're established, they barely need extra watering at all. Here's something that surprised me when I first read about it. If you leave the seed heads standing later in fall, they actually become one of the main winter food sources for goldfinches. So this isn't about deadheading forever, it's about timing it right, doing it in July, then backing off later in the season. The mistake people make most is deadheading the whole plant in one go instead of doing it gradually, stem by stem, as each one fades. What you actually want is to cut individual stems back to just above a lateral branch. That encourages the plant to branch out and grow taller in that spot, instead of just giving you one shorter stem with a single flower. Get the timing wrong here, and you'll either shortchange the birds that depend on those seed heads come fall, or shortchange your own garden of some of its best color. And that actually brings us to a flower that most people are deadheading completely backward. Flower number 4 is lavender. And honestly, this one gets you before you even see it. Those long silvery green stems topped with those tiny purple flower spikes, the second warm air moves through the bed, that smell hits you. It's that herbal floral scent that turns a regular walk past your border into something that feels almost like a spa moment. My wife always says our lavender patch is the closest thing we have to a vacation without leaving the backyard. It grows about 1 to 3 feet tall depending on the variety, with that narrow gray-green foliage and slim spikes packed with small blooms running anywhere from pale lilac to a deep violet blue. And here's the nice part. It stays compact and mounded even while it's flowering, so it never gets that leggy, out-of-control look. Lavender blooms heaviest in June and July, and here's where I see people mess this up constantly. They wait until every single spike has fully browned before they cut anything, and honestly, by then it's too late. What you actually want to do is deadhead as soon as the lower third of each spike starts fading. Do that, and you'll often get a lighter second bloom by early fall instead of just staring at bare, woody stems for the rest of the season. It likes full sun, soil that's on the leaner side and drains fast, and once it's established, it really doesn't need much water at all. It does well in zones 5 through 9. And here's the thing, rich soil or heavy watering doesn't help this plant. It actually shortens its life. Sometimes with lavender, less really is more. Here's a fact that surprised me. Roman soldiers actually used lavender to disinfect battlefield wounds, centuries before anyone even understood what antiseptic properties were. They just knew it worked. Now, the mistake almost everyone makes is only cutting the flower spike itself and leaving those woody, bare stems behind. It makes the plant look ragged, and honestly, it stalls new growth completely. What you want to do instead is shear back into the top third of the green foliage, but never cut into that old bare wood, because it won't grow back from there. And this part matters. Cut into the wrong wood just once, and you could lose that whole section of the plant for good, which makes what we're covering next even more important to get right. Flower number 5 is the daylily, and honestly, this one does something almost no other flower on this list can do. Each bloom opens fresh in the morning, closes by evening, and the next day, there's already another bud ready to take its place. It genuinely feels like the plant's putting on a little show just for you, day after day. They grow anywhere from 1 to 4 feet tall, depending on the variety, with that strap-like grassy foliage arching out from a dense clump, and the flower stalks rise up well above the leaves in shades of orange, yellow, red, pink, even deep burgundy. Here's the thing, though. Each individual flower only lasts a single day. But a mature clump is putting out dozens of them across the whole season, so you're never really without blooms. Daylilies bloom heaviest from June through July, and by midsummer, those spent flowers turn into these mushy brown husks fast, especially in the heat. Honestly, it can drag the whole plant's appearance down within hours, not days. But if you deadhead daily during peak bloom, the plant just keeps pushing out new buds instead of wasting energy holding on to ones that are already done. They handle full sun to partial shade, pretty much any soil type, and moderate water. They do well in zones 3 through 10, which honestly makes them one of the most forgiving flowers on this whole list. If you've ever felt like you have a black thumb, this is a good one to start with. Here's a fact that surprised me. Daylily buds and blooms are actually edible, and they've been used in Asian cooking for centuries, often stir-fried or tossed fresh into salads. I didn't realize that until I looked into it myself. Now, the mistake most people make is just leaving those spent blooms on the plant, figuring they'll dry up and fall off on their own eventually. But what you really want to do is pinch or snip each faded flower off at its base every day, and once a whole stalk finishes blooming, cut that entire stalk back down to the foliage. Skip this habit for even a week, and you'll watch what was a beautiful display turn into brown clutter almost overnight. It happens faster than you'd think. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly not the type of person who's okay watching their yard fade out by August. So here's my honest ask. Go ahead and subscribe, because every week I'm breaking down this same kind of specific, zone-accurate technique. And the flower coming up next, that's the one I mentioned all the way back at the start of this video. It's about to make a lot more sense. All right, flower number 6. This is the one I promised you way back at the start of the video, and once I explain why, you'll get exactly why it earned that spot. Salvia puts up these tall spikes packed with deep purple-blue flowers, so richly colored they almost look fake against the green foliage. And even in blazing afternoon sun, when weaker plants start to wash out and fade, Salvia just holds onto that color. It grows about 1 to 3 feet tall. Nice, tidy, upright, mounding shape, with spikes rising up above the foliage, in colors ranging from deep violet to soft lavender blue, sometimes white or pink, depending on the variety. It's compact enough that it works just as well at the front of a border as it does in the middle. Now here's something important. Salvia doesn't bloom continuously, it comes in flushes. The first one peaks in June and starts fading hard by early July. And honestly, this is exactly the point where most people give up on it for the season. They don't realize that one good, aggressive cut is really all that's standing between them and a second flush by August. It likes full sun, soil that drains well, and once it's established, it doesn't need much water at all. It does well in zones 4 through 8, and here's a nice bonus. It's genuinely deer-resistant thanks to that aromatic foliage. If deer have ever wiped out a bed of yours overnight, you know how valuable that is. Here's a fact that surprised me. That scent isn't just pleasant to us, it's actually a natural deterrent that keeps deer and rabbits away, not just from the salvia itself, but from everything planted around it too. Now, the mistake most people make is only trimming the top of each faded spike. It leaves the plant looking scraggly, and it barely triggers any new growth. What you actually want to do is cut the entire stem back to about 4 to 6 inches from the ground, hard, right after that first flush fades. Do this right, and Salvia rewards you twice over. Skip it, and honestly, you won't even see the next flower's full potential either, because the two of them depend on each other more than you'd expect. Before we get into flower 7, I want to pause here for a second. Out of the 6 flowers we've covered so far, Balm, Shasta daisy, Coneflower, Lavender, Daylily, and Salvia, which one are you most excited to get out there and deadhead this July? Drop it in the comments and let me know your USDA zone while you're at it. I read every comment, and honestly, your answers shape what I end up covering in future videos, so this isn't just me asking for the sake of it. Whether you're in a hot zone down south or a cooler one up north, I genuinely want to know what you're working with. Flower number 7 is Catmint, and this one brings a soft, billowing texture that honestly nothing else on this list really has. It's this loose cloud of tiny lavender blue blooms sitting above silvery green foliage, and it moves gently with even the slightest breeze. It has a way of softening the whole edge of a bed, kind of like how a good throw pillow softens up a stiff living room couch. It grows about 12 to 24 inches tall depending on the variety, and instead of standing up straight like a spike, it spills out in this mounded shape. The small tubular flowers run from pale lavender to a deeper blue-violet, loosely packed along slender stems. And here's the nice part. That gray-green foliage still looks good even in between bloom cycles, so it's never really an eyesore. Catmint blooms heaviest from late spring through June, and by early July, that first flush starts looking thin and straggly, with the flowers spaced further apart than they were. This is exactly the moment to step in, because a hard cutback right now triggers a second flush that's often just as full as the first one. It likes full sun to light shade, soil that drains well, and once it's established, it barely needs any water. It does fine in zones 3 through 8, and honestly, it's remarkably forgiving of poor or rocky soil that would stress out most other flowering plants. If you've got that one tricky spot in the yard where nothing seems to grow right, this might be your answer. Here's a fact that surprised me. Catmint is closely related to catnip, but it doesn't have that same chemical compound in it. So your cats will admire it, maybe roll around near it a little, but they won't tear it apart the way they would actual catnip. Now the mistake most people make is lightly trimming just the spent flower tips instead of cutting back hard. That leaves the plant looking tired for the rest of the summer. What you actually want to do is shear the whole plant down to about 4 inches once that first flush completely fades. Get this timing right, and catmint becomes one of the most reliable rebloomers you'll ever plant. Get it wrong, and you'll miss out on a flower most people mistakenly write off by midsummer, when really, it's just getting started. Flower number 8 is garden phlox, and honestly, this one announces itself before you even see it. You'll be out in the yard on a warm evening, and this sweet, rich fragrance just carries across the air. Then you spot it, these big rounded clusters of flowers sitting on top of tall stems, almost like little bouquets built right into the plant. It grows about 3 to 4 feet tall on upright stems, with dense clusters made up of dozens of small blooms in pink, white, lavender, red, and some bicolor varieties that have this contrasting eye right in the center of each flower. On a mature, well-fed plant, those clusters can span 6 to 8 inches across. It's a good-sized presence in a garden bed, not something that gets lost in the background. Phlox blooms from July through September, and here's a twist I didn't expect either. Deadheading this one in July isn't just about getting more blooms. It's actually about keeping your colors true. See, if you let the spent clusters sit there and drop their seeds, the offspring that come up next year often revert to this muddy, kind of undesirable pink, nothing like what you originally planted. So if you remove those spent clusters right away, you're protecting the exact variety you paid for and planted in the first place. It likes full sun, soil that's moist and fertile, and needs consistent watering through the season. It does well in zones 4 through 8. And here's something worth remembering. Poor air circulation is actually this plant's biggest enemy, even more than drought. Give it some breathing room when you plant it. Here's a fact that surprised me. Garden phlox is one of the best hummingbird attractants of any perennial out there, and it often outperforms actual hummingbird feeders simply because the blooms stay fresh and available for weeks at a time instead of needing to be refilled. Now, the mistake most people make is waiting until an entire cluster turns brown before cutting anything, which just lets the seeds drop and germinate nearby. What you actually want to do is snip the whole cluster down to the nearest set of leaves the moment more than half the blooms have faded. Get this one wrong, and next year's phlox patch might not even look like what you planted this year. Which brings us to the final flower on this entire list. Alright, we're closing this list out with a flower that honestly kind of defines the American summer garden. Bright golden yellow petals wrapped around a dark, almost chocolate brown center. It's bold enough to catch your eye from clear across the yard, and cheerful enough that it can anchor an entire bed all on its own. It grows about 2 to 3 feet tall on sturdy, upright stems, and it's got this confident, structural look that rarely ever needs staking. The petals hold that vivid gold color even through intense afternoon sun, the kind that would wash out weaker flowers completely, and that deep brown center gives it striking contrast against just about any backdrop. Black-eyed Susan blooms from late June all the way through October, which is honestly one of the longest bloom windows on this whole list. But by July, that first wave of flowers starts fading fast in the summer heat. Deadhead selectively right now, and you'll stretch that heavy blooming well into fall instead of watching it taper off early. It likes full sun, and here's the good part, it tolerates poor, clay, or sandy soil without complaint. It does well in zones 3 through 9, and once it's established, it's genuinely drought tolerant. It'll shrug off a missed watering or two that would stress out other plants in your yard. Here's a fact that surprised me. If you leave some of the seed heads standing later in the season instead of deadheading everything, goldfinches will actually feed directly off them through winter. It turns your garden into a food source at a time of year when nothing else is blooming, which honestly feels like a nice thing to leave behind for the birds. Now, the most common mistake is deadheading every single spent flower without exception, which wipes out that wildlife benefit completely. What you actually want to do is deadhead the easily reachable spent blooms through July to keep the flowers coming, but leave some heads standing once autumn starts rolling in. So there you have it, 9 flowers, 9 specific techniques. And honestly, the difference between a garden that fades out by August and one that keeps going strong really comes down to one thing, actually doing this the right way, starting today. Now, here's something almost nobody talks about. You can know exactly which flower to cut and exactly when to cut it, and still end up disappointed if you're making one simple mistake with how you're actually doing the cutting. Honestly, this is the reason 2 gardeners can deadhead the same plant on the same day and end up with completely different results. Let's start with your tools. If you're using a dull pair of scissors, or just grabbing whatever household shears are in the drawer, you're not really cutting the plant tissue, you're crushing it. And a crushed stem heals slower, which leaves that jagged little wound wide open for fungal disease and bacteria to get in, especially in the kind of humid heat we get in July. What you want instead are sharp bypass pruners, not the anvil-style ones. Bypass blades slide past each other like scissors do, giving you a clean slice, while anvil pruners just crush the stem between a blade and a flat edge. And before you even touch a plant, sanitize your blades. Wipe them down with rubbing alcohol, or a diluted bleach solution works too, and do this between plants, not just once when you start. Here's the thing. If you go from a diseased plant straight to a healthy one without cleaning your tools in between, you're basically handing that disease a ride over. And in July's heat and humidity, it spreads even faster than you'd expect. Your cutting angle matters more than most people realize. Cut at a slight angle, somewhere around 45 degrees, rather than straight across. An angled cut lets water run off instead of pooling on top of the stem, and standing water sitting on a fresh wound is exactly what invites rot and fungal growth during those humid summer weeks. Timing of day makes a difference too. Deadhead in the early morning or early evening, never during the peak heat of the afternoon. Cutting a plant under intense sun stresses it out right when it's already working to heal that fresh wound, and honestly, that extra stress can slow down the very regrowth you're trying to encourage in the first place. And last thing, always cut just above a leaf node or lateral bud, never in the middle of a bare stem. Cutting mid-stem just leaves a dead, brown stub that doesn't do anything for the plant and can still invite disease. But cutting right above a node redirects the plant's energy immediately into growing something new from that exact spot. Here's the rewritten version. Alright, getting July right is really just the first phase. Here's exactly what to do through the rest of the season to keep this momentum going, and I'll adjust this for your specific climate too. Throughout July, your main job is just staying consistent with deadheading, and honestly, a little aggressive about it. Check on your bee balm, Shasta daisies, coneflowers, daylilies, salvia, catmint, phlox, and black-eyed Susans every 3 to 4 days. If you're in a hot southern zone, zones 8 and 9, the heat speeds up both blooming and fading at the same time, so you might need to check every other day just to keep pace. If you're up in a cooler zone, 4 or 5 every 4 to 5 days is usually plenty, since everything moves a bit slower up there. By early August, you should start seeing those second flushes coming in on salvia, catmint, and Shasta daisies, assuming your July cuts were timed right. Keep deadheading through this stretch, but ease off on lavender. It's naturally wrapping up its bloom cycle and doesn't need a third push. If you're in a hotter climate, keep an eye on coneflowers and phlox for heat stress. Both of them do better with one deep watering a week during August's worst heat, rather than frequent shallow watering that never really reaches the roots. Mid to late August is also when you'll want to back off deadheading your black-eyed Susans and coneflowers. Start leaving some of those spent blooms alone so the seed heads can begin forming ahead of fall. Think of it as setting up a little pantry for the birds through winter. Once September rolls around, shift your focus from encouraging new blooms to getting everything ready for dormancy. Phlox and daylilies will naturally slow down no matter where you live, though cooler zones usually see it happen earlier, sometimes by mid-September, while warmer zones might still have decent blooms into early October. And by this point, stop deadheading the black-eyed Susans and coneflowers completely. Just let those seed heads mature. By October, all that's really left is a light cleanup. Pull off anything diseased or damaged, but leave those structural seed heads standing through winter for the wildlife. Skip this rhythm altogether, and you'll either burn your plants out too early or miss out on the fall color they're perfectly capable of giving you. So, out of these 9 flowers, where should you actually start? Here's my honest take. If you're newer to gardening, start with black-eyed Susans, daylilies, and Shasta daisies. All 3 forgive imperfect soil, forgive inconsistent watering, and respond quickly to even basic deadheading, so you'll see results fast enough to stay motivated instead of losing steam halfway through summer. We've all been there. If you've been at this a few seasons, and you're after bigger, more dramatic blooms, focus on salvia, catmint, and lavender. These 3 reward a precise, aggressive cutback with genuinely impressive second flushes, but they don't forgive hesitation. A gentle trim just won't cut it here, literally. You've got to commit to the hard cutback these plants actually need. If fragrance and pollinators matter most to you, make garden phlox and bee balm your priority. Both bring in hummingbirds reliably, and they fill your yard with a scent that daylilies or black-eyed Susans just can't compete with. And coneflower kind of sits in its own category, honestly. It's forgiving enough for beginners, but rewarding enough for experienced gardeners chasing fall color and winter wildlife at the same time. But here's the real truth. Doing 2 or 3 of these well is good. Doing all 9 correctly, on the right schedule, with the right cuts, that's what separates a garden that just looks nice from one that looks genuinely professional, the kind your neighbors stop and ask you about on their evening walk. You don't need to master all 9 overnight. Start with whatever you already have planted, apply what you just learned, and build from there next season. If this video just saved your summer garden from fading early, do one thing for me. Send it to that one friend or family member you already know is about to make every mistake we just covered. They'll thank you for it by August. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit that button, tap the bell, and you won't miss next week's video, because I'm covering this same kind of specific, zone-accurate technique every single week. Before you go, drop a comment and tell me which of these 9 flowers is already growing in your yard, and which one you're deadheading first. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know. Your garden doesn't have to fade come August. Now you know exactly why it was happening and exactly how to fix it, starting today.